Hello, my name is Bill Conway. I am the president of the Lynn Historical Society. I'm standing on a hill in Pine Grove Cemetery overlooking the Super Stop and Shop on Boston Street. This site was the home of Lynn Hospital for over 100 years. Stay tuned and I will show you Lynn Hospital the way it was. I call this program Lynn Hospital the way it was, just for that reason. It's the way it was. It's not the complete history of the hospital. I think there's some excellent photographs here that you'll find interesting and entertaining, I hope. When you mention Lynn Hospital, this is probably the view most of us remember of the hospital, the administration building. This road out in front here is Hospital Avenue, and that's where most of the business was taken care of, right along in here. One thing I like about this picture is there's no parking sign here with the cars parked in front of it. That tells you how much authority the hospital had. Before you accuse me of being a Mike Barnacle, I have to tell you right up front, I got a lot of my information from this book here, The History of Lynn Hospital. As you can see, it's well battered and it's quite old. It was published in 1918. So I have history from the first day of the hospital up to 1918. From there, I'm on my own. Back in the 1800s, after the Civil War, Lynn started to become a commercial enterprise. They had businesses that were starting to grow, and a lot of people worked in the shops downtown of Lynn, but there were no hospitals downtown. In those days, if a person got hurt at work or anywhere, there was no hospital to take the person to, and what you did, you literally put them in a wheelbarrow or in a wagon and carted them off to the nearest drugstore. This is one of the shoe shops downtown. This here is on what they call Railroad Avenue, which was approximately where the railroad is today, and this was called Willow Street over here. This is the Charles Buffum Company. So if you worked here and you got hurt, you're pretty much on your own. As Lynn grew, it became completely commercialized. Downtown now, all these shoe shops and factories downtown, and there still was no hospitals. So again, if you got hurt, they put you in a wheelbarrow and take you off to the drugstore. And once you got to the drugstore, the druggist would contact the police officer, who was always handy, and he'd go out and search for the local doctor. The doctor would come to the drugstore and treat you. And depending upon your condition is what happened to you next. If you happen to live in the city, which a lot of people weren't, they were transits who were coming in and working here, they had no place to go, he would take you to the city hall. And down the basement of the city hall, there was a room where they just stored people who were sick and injured and didn't know what else to do with them. This picture is very faded, but it does show a wagon in front of the city hall, which I thought was amazing. And if you're really injured, what they would do, put you back in the wheelbarrow or a wagon and take you down to the train depot. And when you get to the train depot, you'd have to wait for a train. This one here is heading in the direction of Salem. There was a Salem hospital at the time. Or you go in the other direction, south, you go to Boston. And the Mass General Hospital will be there, we're waiting for you. There's reports of people waiting up to an hour on the platform for a train. And then when they get into Boston, there was another wait where they got another wagon to transport them to the Mass General Hospital. So this wasn't a very good situation at all. While this was going on, there was a group of a watch society. Mostly they were volunteers or do-gooders. And their job was to go around to different homes and nurse these people back into health. Pretty much like the Visiting Nurses Association does today, but on a strictly volunteer basis. And they would come and try to help you back to health. But if you were too bad and you were going to die, they would still come, but they would come and pray for you. So if you were laying in bed and you had no idea what your problem was, and these good fellows showed up and they started to pray for you, the first thing you do is contact a local undertaker, because you were in trouble. Again, they didn't have funeral homes in those days. You were awake from your home. But this is how it worked anyway. To the Watch Society people, this was totally unacceptable. So in 1874, they met in Nathan Breed's house, which is this house here on Broad Street. Exchange Street would be approximately on the left-hand side, Dalton Street would be on the right-hand side. That's where the house was initially. And these women got together and they said that something must be done to have a hospital. And they decided that they would go home and talk to their husbands, some of them were very wealthy, and get some money up and to rent a building and start a hospital. The first hospital location was on Water Hill Street. This is Federal Street where the Westland GE Works used to be. This is Water Hill Street here. This photograph was from an 1880 atlas. This is Marion Street and Boston Street's down here. What's ironic, the Phillips estate is where the building was leased. Strawberry Brook flows right by in front of it, as it does in the hospital we know it up in Boston Street. So Strawberry Brook rode by both of the hospitals. This building here, the Phillips estate, this is a picture of it. In the history of Lynn Hospital says at one time this was a 3-story building, but now it's a 2-story because of a fire. I assume it was a 3-story when the hospital was there. Notice in the background there's one of the commercial buildings with the JE. Again, depending upon when the picture was taken, it's either the Thompson Electric Company or the General Electric Company. So in 1875, the hospital moved into this building. And they were here for a little over 4 years, and they realized things weren't going too well for them. The biggest problem they had, there was no indoor plumbing. And they were wearing out the bed fans right and left. So they asked the landlord if he would make some modernize the building and install some indoor plumbing, and he refused. So at the end of 4 years and 2 months, they moved out of this building and shut the hospital down. That's in 1879. In 1880, the Lynn item, this is the old building now, before the fire of 1889, was located here right in Central Square. Exchange Street to your left. This is Union Street going down towards Broad. And the new item building is approximately over here. That Charles Buffum Company I showed you the very first slide was directly across the street on Railroad Avenue here. Anyway, this was the item building. They proposed a plan, and they called it the Hospital for Ascent Plan. And what they proposed was that if every resident in the city of Lynn was to donate 1 penny a week, we could have a hospital. Now, a penny a week doesn't sound like much, but it's 50 cents a year, and there was 40,000 residents in the city. That's $20,000 a year. And some of the more wealthier people would contribute a lot more than that. And they did. They set up collection agencies throughout the city. A lot of the shop foremen would go around on payday and collect a penny from the workers. The churches got involved and has a collection point. And eventually they got the money. And they deposited it in the Lynn 5-cent savings bank. Now this is not the bank that was there in 1880, but this is on the same location as that bank was. One of the properties they proposed for the location of the new hospital was on Layton Street. This one here. This is from a 1880 atlas also. This is Washington Street and Western Avenue. This is Layton Street. This Rock Avenue today is called Lawton Avenue. They changed the name of it. And the lot they had in mind was right here. There was a pond located in this location here. And there was also a gravel dump for the street department. When the street department made new streets, they bring the excess gravel back, throw it in the pond, and eventually they filled the pond in and they made a lot. And that was offered to the Hospital Association. The city sold it to the Hospital Association for $1. The powers to be decided that was not a good location for the hospital, and decided to move on and look for another location. That was in 1881. In 1886, the Hospital Association sold this property for $5,500, and they got it for $1. So it was a good real estate investment. The place they finally decided to have a hospital was in the Hawthorne Estate. Again, this is Boston Street, Washington Street, Western Avenue, and this is Franklin Street. And this was the Hawthorne Estate. Again, this is Strawberry Brook. This is the waterway that flows from the Fox Pond into the Saugus River. They bought this building here, and eventually they bought the property around the area. I'll show you a slide pretty soon about this property here. This was made into the maternity home in 1896. They started off with this one building, and they decided to have what they call a cottage plan for a hospital. And what that meant was they wanted to have a series of smaller buildings. And the reasoning was that if one building became infected, they could just tear that building down and still have a hospital remaining. So they built a couple of buildings behind here, and everything was going well until they found out the logistics weren't too good. In one of the buildings, the operating room was next to the kitchen. So the smells from the kitchen was getting into the operating room, and the smells from the operating room were getting into the kitchen. So that wasn't working out too well. Another building, the laundry was in the basement, and right above the laundry was one of the ward rooms. And the smells from the laundry, the bleach and the steam were coming up through the floor, and that wasn't very good for the patients either. So they had to build a couple more buildings back there, again on the cottage plan, many buildings. This is probably the first picture of the completed hospital at that time. Again, Strawberry Brook is in the front. This is looking from Boston Street. This building in the background here is called Ward A. You can recognize Ward A because the dormers had like ventilator systems in the top of it up there. This is from Boston Street, and this is a view from Western Avenue. You can see the same dormers up there with the vents in them. Down in the museum, we have a collection of a photo album. I can only assume it came from an employee, a nurse probably from the hospital in the old days. And it's a fabulous collection, and she has a lot of pictures in this album, of which they're all marked, and sometimes there's a personal notation about them. But unfortunately, some of them are pretty old and they're faded, as this picture here is. But the notation in this picture says, notice the posts in the backyard here. That was used for the clotheslines. That's where they hung the laundry out to dry for the laundry. That's Building A. Again, you can recognize Building A by the dormers on the roof. If we jump ahead about 20 years, you can see this is Ward A, this was Ward B, and Ward C. Ward C was eventually the children's ward of the Purveyor building, which was built in 1915. Again, you can recognize the sections up there. This is the maternity home I told you was located on Boston Street, right along this little driveway. This driveway was eventually called Hospital Avenue. And in 1896, this was converted into a maternity home. When they first started the hospital, they had to come up with some salaries for the staff. And these are some of the salaries. The matron received $35 a month, a female night nurse $20, etc. A man for general work at $9 a week, and a washerwoman for $5 a week. If you were to convert the weekly pay into a monthly pay and say 4 weeks for a month, the washerwoman made $20 a month, as did the female night nurse. The man for general work made $9 or $36 a month, which was more than the matron. So the medical staff made less money than the maintenance people did. And this is a breakdown of the numbers they had their first year in operation. There was 102 patients that year, of which 10 still remained in the hospital. They show the discharges under 4 categories: discharge well, discharge improved, discharge not improved, and died. That's the worst, I guess, there is, when you discharge by dying. In 1892, they built the administration building. And this building cost $15,000 in its day to build. And located in this building, there was the accident ward, the operating room, the kitchen, the laundry, you name it, everything was in here. And at this time, most of the staff lived on the grounds of the hospital. So there also were living quarters in the upper floors for some of the staff. This opened up in February of 1892. In December of 1892, this is a picture from a Christmas scene. They have a Christmas tree out in front with big spotlights all around it, and the wreaths in the doors. Inside this new building, this was the women's ward. In those days, they put a bed between the windows. In later days, they would put the beds closer together so they could fit more beds into the wards. But this shows the women's ward. There's a fireplace down the end of the room. There's a little girl and a boy probably coming in to visit their mother. This is the male ward, which is very similar. Again, a little boy visiting his father with the fireplace. For those of you who think ceiling fans are a new invention, they're not. Back in the 1892s they had them, so they're not that new of a deal. This is the accident ward, the accident room. This gentleman here was a Dr. Arthur Harris. He was the house physician. It looks like a regular wooden table with a piece of oilcloth thrown across the top of it there. And that was the accident ward. This is the operating room. Again, Dr. Harris with his right-hand assistant. I don't know what his name is, but he shows up in quite a few of these pictures. If you want to see something gross, though, notice this, trough, whatever it is here. This was a piece of, looks like oilcloth, which the body fluids would flow down into a bucket in the floor. They didn't have the suction hoses like they have today. You can see the pail right there. Very, very crude, but evidently it worked. This is the drug room. Again, Dr. Harris, and the head nurse was an Annie Fletcher. This is her here. She graduated in the class of 1892. This photo was from that album I told you about, the woman on the staff. In the notation in the back of this photograph, she listed that the drugs most commonly used were Epsom salt and castor oil. Those are the drugs of the day. This is a picture of the kitchen. The woman on the left is Lizzie Miner. She was the cook. The woman on the right is the laundress. She was in charge of the laundry, but we see her quite a bit, and she always wears a dark dress. That's how we can distinguish her. On the back of this photograph, it said that those are Thanksgiving turkeys in the oven. And who says it's futile? I can't. And this is Maggie now in the laundry. She's doing some ironing down here. You can see all the sinks. Looks like she has some sheets hanging out here to dry inside. It must have been a bad drying day outside or something. That's her doing her thing. Dr. Arthur Harris had an office. This was his office with a steam radiator pipe there, radiator system. The matron, Mrs. Rose Bernard, this was her office. And the quote, notation on the back of this photograph said, "Note the worn spots on the carpet." This is for the nurses being called in on the carpet. And then it quotes, it says, "I know." I don't think this woman was that bad, because in 1904 she was elected the first president of the Nurses Alumni Association, so she couldn't have been that bad. This is the head nurse in her room. Miss Fletcher again. Notice all these rooms just have shades. There are no curtains. Very, very crude. But this is Maggie, the laundress. She has nice curtains in her room. But she has an iron. She can do her own curtains and drapes. After a hard day's work, the staff would go to what they call the nurses' parlor, or the parlor. And they had, oh, I'm sorry, I'm ahead of myself. This is nurses' dining room. This is Lizzie Miller. I'm sorry, I skipped a slide here. This is her nurses' dining room. This is Mrs. Walsh's room up on the 3rd floor. You can see the roof lines over here. Get ahead of myself. Now, after a hard day at the office, they would come up and relax into the parlor. This is a nurse playing the piano. There's Dr. Harris again. You recognize him, and this is his right-hand man assistant here. And this must be the laundress here, Maggie. She's got her dark dress on. But this is how they unwound at night, still in uniform. This photograph was just titled "The Help." It was the cook and dining room. Again, you recognize the black dress here for Maggie, the laundress. This photograph is just called "The Nurses, the Matrons, and the House Physician." Again, Dr. Harris and his right-hand man, and there's Maggie with the dark dress again. She really sticks out. While all this was going on Boston Street, around the corner on Linwood Road, Union Hospital was just starting to open up. And this is a view from a 1905 atlas I have, and it shows Union Hospital up here on Linwood Road. It's further down here, it also says Union Hospital. That is the nurses' home. Initially, the building on the estate up there was part of the Philby Preston Tapley estate on Lover's Leap. Had a nice view overlooking the city. But in 1901, it became the Union Hospital. And there's a picture of it with some of the nurses out in front. In later years, they added a wing on it over here to expand the capacity of the hospital. The next photograph is on these stairs right over here. This is the staff sitting on the stairs. Again, there's a doctor in the middle. I assume that's the house physician. You notice the woman in the front row has a kitten in her lap. So they love the animals too. Further down the street was a nurse's home. This is a copy of a postcard I have in my collection, and it's called "The Nurse's Home Connected with Union Hospital." In 1953, the new Union Hospital opened up on Linfield Street, and this was a program they handed out for the opening day ceremonies, and it told pretty much about the facilities inside and some of the services that were available. And this is what the building looked like when it first opened. You probably recall that in 1985, the Union Hospital and the Lynn Hospital would merge and become known as the Atlanticare. While this was going on, also deep in West Lynn were a couple other smaller hospitals. This was the new tuberculosis hospital, and right next door to that was a contagious hospital. This property today is called the Devlin Nursing Home on Holyoke Street, and it's still in operation down there. Al Weber, one of our volunteers in our photo department down at the museum, told me that when he was about 7 years old, his mother went to the hospital to have a baby. And when she was bringing the child home, he came down with measles, and he couldn't be in the house with the baby, so he had to be admitted into the contagious hospital. And he said it was over Christmas. It was very sad, he said. Shortly after he was sent home, a couple of months later, his father came down with scarlet fever and was admitted into Contagious Hospital. In those days, the two most contagious diseases were diphtheria and scarlet fever. In the back here, there's another building, and that was for the smallpox ward of the hospital, more contagious diseases. I told you the hospital opened in 1883, the very first hospital at this location. And also in 1883 was the first year they had a training school for the nurses. Initially it was called Lynn Hospital Training School, then it was called the Lynn Hospital School of Nursing. But in 1883 they started, and they were in business up until 1870. 1979 was the last class that graduated. This shows some of the students going into the Ireson nursing home. The first nursing home was built in 1916. It's the Luther Johnson Nursing Home. And this was torn down in 1973 when they made a new boiler plant, new operation facility for the boilers here to heat the complex. Another nursing home was the Ireson Nursing Home. This was built in 1929. Initially it was a 3-story building, but during the Second World War, for whatever reason, Uncle Sam paid to have a 4th story added onto it. In the Ireson Nursing Home and the Johnson Nursing Home were connected. You could go from one to the other, pass from one to the other. This is a photograph dated 1923. Again, it's very, very faded. It's in tough shape. If you look up in the wall here on this banner, it says LHTS. That's the Lynn Hospital Training School. And it does say 1923 right down there on it. And this is a nurse instructing the class. I think she's teaching them how to make donuts, but I'm not sure. There's something on the board there. Again, that was 1923. This is a class in 1929. Notice all the girls have their hair in a bun. Must have been a code of the day or something for sanitary reasons. In 1940, it shows some of the students in the chemistry lab. You could tell the students they wore the starch bibs in front and they had the striped blouses. And I've been told that the hats tell a lot of stories too. That for the first 6 months a student was in school, they didn't get to wear a cap. But after the 6 months, they get to wear a plain one. In the senior year, they got to wear one with a black band on it. So you could tell how much education they had, I guess, by the band in their hat. Right. These are students in the classroom in 1962 as a doctor, as a teacher, came in to lecture the class for the day. So the girls, the students had classroom studies, and they also had the chemistry lab, but they also had physical fitness. This is a class doing calisthenics in Ryan Hall. Ryan Hall was in the Ireson Nursing Home. According to my records, in 1961 was the first year there was a male nurse graduate. There's a male person in the front row here. I don't know if that's him or not. I don't know what date this picture is. But they tell me this man had a great time at the class picnic. This is the students with a mannequin, working on a mannequin. Again, these nurses here do not have caps on, so I can only assume they're in the first 6 months of training. But this mannequin got a lot of use. On Lynn Hospital Career Day, Hospital Week in 1965, this picture was taken. It shows some of the nurses going through their routines with a mannequin. There's also another mannequin down there not doing too well. But notice how the uniforms have changed. This picture lists the names of the students in here, and I was checking back on the years they graduated. It was sometime between 1915 and 1917 that this class graduated. This woman in the middle here, in the front, was a Mrs. Kuykendall. She was the night superintendent. On the back of this photograph, there was a notation made, she was not a Lynn Hospital grad. That was kind of a slam, I thought, to say that she wasn't one of them, but she was in charge anyway. That was, say, 1960. Notice how long the dresses are. In 1935, the dresses got a little bit shorter and the classes got a little bit bigger. This next photo is not dated. I don't know what year it is. Hopefully one of you will know. But this shows a bigger class. And I believe this is in front of the Ireson Nursing Home. And in 1973, this is a bigger class. Notice the dresses are much shorter. Okay. What year? 1952. Is it really? What? 1955. Class of 55. Thank you. Are you in the picture?
Yeah, I think that's that.
Okay, where were you? Where were you? Where were you? You in the picture? I don't know. Huh? Okay. She thinks she's in the picture, but she's not sure. It was 1955, she's there. In 1973, again, the dresses got a lot shorter. If you notice the caps, there are two different types of caps here. This is what I call the starch cap, and this one here I call the puffy cap. They tell me originally the hospital started out with the puffy caps. In the 30s and 40s and 50s, they went to the starch caps, and in the 60s they got back to the puffy ones again. By a puffy cap, I mean this here, again with the black band on it. Back to the other picture. Was she a teacher? Miss Flood? Miss Flood. Okay, Miss Flood. Thank you, doctor. Again, this is what I call the puffy cap. It's a softer material. It's not the heavy starch. This is the nurse's pin. They got this upon graduation, and this was their badge of honor when they wore that. That meant they were a full-fledged nurse. They graduated from school, and now they had to take their boards, the state boards, and once they passed the state boards, they become an RN, a registered nurse. And a sad day for the hospital was when the Islip nursing home was torn down. This was in 1996. Going back in history now to 1904, Ward E opened. This is what Ward E looked like. It had like a sunroom on the end of it here. And in 1911, the service building was built. This building here included the kitchen. There was a laundry. There was also a sleeping room for some of the staffs. And when they made this, they allowed room for expansion for the outpatient department in the other part of the hospital. What it was? Building on the right? Okay. On this photograph here, this is a postcard I have in my collection. And when I bought the card, I really didn't know what it was. It does say outpatient, and this is definitely the administration building in Lynn Hospital. Again, I didn't know what it was for. In 1980, the item come out with a supplementary issue to one of their editions of the paper for the 100th anniversary of the hospital. I told you the hospital opened in 1883, so 100 years really isn't 1980, but the hospital figured it was because that's when they started the fundraising and they probably got organized in 1880. But this photograph appeared in the supplementary of the item, and under the photograph it said, outpatient department, entire family waits outside for father to complete his treatment. It even shows a dog there waiting for the father to complete the treatment. This building I showed you earlier, this was part of the C ward. I told you the A, B, and C ward. This was the children's ward, and it was called the Purveyor building. They were named after one of the past presidents of the hospital who donated some money to construct it. You can always recognize this building by the round end windows here. Inside this area, the round red windows, is this children's ward. It showed all the children there. So some of the toys on the floor. If you had those toys today, you'd be pretty wealthy. Those are all collectibles today. This is another scene in the children's ward. Again, they put the beds between the windows with no curtains for privacy at all in those days. In 1935 was this view of the children's ward. There's a nurse with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 children she's taking care of there, one nurse, in 1935. Going back to the service building, this is the kitchen they had in there. A little bit different than the first one we had with the Thanksgiving turkeys in it. And they also had a special kitchen for the dietary kitchen. That's this one here. Also, one of the first Meals on Wheels was this unit here. Looks like it might have been an old wheelchair at one time, and they converted it into a carriage to transport the meals around. This is the main dining room for doctors and nurses. Again, very plain, no curtains, no drapes, just shades in the windows. In the laundry, this is the laundry room. They come a little more modern now. They have a big press here to iron all the sheets. See the linens piled up on the table behind them. But you can imagine how hot that must have been in the summer in there. I told you when they built the service building, they expanded the outpatient department. This is the waiting room for the outpatient department. And if you couldn't walk into the outpatient department, the Lynn Police Department would help carry you in. This is one of the old ambulance. Then the police department is taking you in the door there. Inside this building now this is the operating room. Very plain, a little more modern than the first one I showed you. This is the accident ward. I get a kick out of this picture. It reminds me of a doctor and nurse hard at work and 3 malpractice attorneys watching them. Waiting to pounce right on them, you know? This is the eyes, ears, nose, and throat outpatient department. But today, isn't the eye chart just the reverse, the big letter on the top and coming down? To me, that looks like it's upside down. Yeah, well, they changed it over the years anyway. This is the main office switchboard, and their claim to fame, it was operated 24 hours a day. Stan Cook, our immediate past president of the society, told me that he worked in the mid-30s as a co-op student from Northeastern University. He worked on the switchboard. He worked 6 days a week, 7 to 7. That's 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week, and he made $15.28 a week. And one of his duties were not only just to answer the switchboard, but also if there was an emergency during the night, he would page some of the doctors who were on call, who were asleep back in their rooms. And also the students had to sign in and out, and it was their job to go to the switchboard operator. There was a curfew at 10 o'clock at night, and the nurses had to be back by then, and it was his job to sign them in. This is the solarium of Ward F. You see all the windows let the sunshine shine in. And you can see the steam radiator pipes going around the building. If it was a real good day, they put the patients outside and show some of the children out there getting the hot sun. It's funny, when the Morgan Wing opened in 1956, it was the first central air-conditioned hospital wing in the country when it was built in 1956, as opposed to putting the kids outside in the fresh air. Also, the day after the Morgan Wing opened up, the second day it was in operation was the day of the Swampscott train wreck. And they brought in 39 victims from the train wreck, plus 11 DOAs. So they were very busy there, but they were fortunate to have the extra facilities to handle the people. You were? You were on duty that day? Must have been very hectic. I can imagine.
It's been renovated.
Yeah.
So how many beds you are on it?
Well, 25 beds?
5 beds on L3. It's completely made up.
Wow. Well, the timing was perfect. Not that an accident is good, but timing was good that they had facilities for them. This is the male ward in 1928. Notice the beds are closer together now. They're putting them in front of the window, but they have a little privacy screens or curtains up for them now. And this is what the main building looked like. I could only assume somewhere around the late 1930s. There was no Redford building on the right. There was no Morgan building or Chase building on the left here. Just the main building itself. Oh.
He built this building during the reign.
And what year was that, Don?
What year did you say?
In the 30s, I'd say, late 30s?
It was built after World War I.
Yeah. Yeah. The hospital always was looking for money. They used to solicit funds all the time. That's how they got started. And in 1906, this is a postcard I have in my collection. It says Lynn Hospital Day, September 29th, 1906. It shows some of the different wards of the hospital. They usually had the fundraising. It was the last Saturday and Sunday in September. And this word here postmarked is 1910. This is from John Koblazewski's postcard collection. He let me copy it. It's handwritten in the bottom, hospital days. And basically it's some kids with flags and stuff with a police officer in the background. If we zoom in on it, you see a little bit better. There's some kids with the flags, again, the police officer. But the signs in the window say Lynn Hospital, September 24th and 25th. So that was in 1910. They were still trying to raise money. In 1913, this is a poster they had up. Matter of fact, they're on sale here at the counter for $1 now today. And it mentions Saturday again, September 27th, and also September 28th, Sunday. And if you made a donation in 1914, they gave you a pin with the old administration building on it, dated 1914. Now the next few pictures are about the maternity wards in children. This is what the maternity ward looked like. I find this very, very strange. All the babies are in one crib. And the mothers don't look too happy. Oh, I don't know what's going on here. Look how, she doesn't look happy at all. But you can see them. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 of them in the one crib. Oh, I don't know what that was about. But in 1908, they gave them their own bassinets and used to hang them on the wall. And then a few years later, they put wheels on them, and they parked them up against the wall. And then a few years later, they put cabinets underneath them, and this is what they look like, with the cabinets underneath them. In 1940, this is a picture of a father meeting his daughter for the very first time. This is a premature baby in 1963. And sometimes you have twins. These are twins in 1962. The Lynn Hospital had a newsletter or a bulletin that come out once a month. And it was called the News from 212. 212 was the address on Boston Street. 212 Boston Street was the hospital. And in the November issue of 1971, this is the cover photo. This is the Doggan family. There's 10 kids here. This John and Iggy Doggan. And they're waving to their mother, Marion, who was upstairs, who had just gave birth to her 12th child. I worked with Marion for many years down at the fire department office. They're a great family. I know most of these kids. The hospital had a plan. I don't want to call it an incentive plan, but it was a plan. If you had 12 children and the whole 12 were born at Lynn Hospital, the 12th one was free. And they called it cheaper by the dozen plan. Personally, I don't think it's worth it, but the Doggans were the 4th family to take advantage of this program, cheaper by the dozen. This is the outpatient department. This is a boy in 1940 getting a cast put on his foot. I don't know how he's going to get his pants off, but they put the cast on first. But that's his problem. And this is the children's ward in 1940 again. One of the student nurses was trying to talk to this girl into having her meal, which I don't think she wants any part of. In 1970, this is the children's ward. Let's lower that down for you. It looks like it's very, very hectic there. The little guy on the left-hand side that's coming out of his room in his walker, and nobody's with him. This nurse is busy. They're all busy, but it's very, very hectic there anyway. In 1963, this is a nurse talking to one of the children, reading a book actually to one of the children, where the one in the background is having her meal with a dolly. In 1960, I believe this is the Morgan wing, is one of the pediatric wards. I told you the hospital opened in 1883, and also the training school opened in 1883. So in 1933, 50 years later, the nurses had an alumni association meeting in Ryan Hall, and this is some of the graduates from the nursing school in 1933. In 1920, this was the X-ray department. You can tell it was an afterthought put in the basement. You can even see the pipes going across the ceiling up there in the basement window. In 1939, they bought their first iron lung. And this is a modern operating room in 1971. And for every operating room, there must be a recovery room. And this is the gurneys lined up here waiting for the people to complete their surgery, be brought back into consciousness. How many of you remember the old emergency entrance? Underneath here, the Lynn Police Department, the ambulance used to bring you in this doorway over here. The hospital also had a guidebook to tell you about some of the facilities and what the rules were and what the services were available. They issued to some of the patients. In 1962, this is a doctor with a couple of nurses at the nurses station doing the paperwork. A lot of paperwork involved. And in 1970, it's just the nurses doing it, a little more modern look there. In the 1950s, this was a private room, all wooden furniture, curtains and drapes, even a wooden dresser. That was a private room. This was a two-bed unit in 1969. That's if you were lucky to get a room. If you got there and it was crowded, you stayed in the corridor, like this picture here shows. There were a few other departments that were non-medical that work in the hospital. This is a photo from 1940 of Helen Stewart, who was a hospital hostess. And in 1939, the Women's Auxiliary was formed. And this is the luncheon they're having in 1940, which was in Ryan Hall, again in Ireson Nursing Home. The Women's Auxiliary ran the gift shop. This is 1971. And they also ran the bookmobile. This is the bookmobile, a very modern cart there. It's like another wheelchair converted. The next view is an aerial view in 1970 of the hospital. Notice the Redford building isn't there, but there is the Johnson Nursing Home and the Ireson Nursing Home. In 1973, this was torn down to make way for the new boiler plant. This is the Morgan building, one of the newer wings at the time. And back here was the Purveyor building, the Purveyor wing, I should say. Washington Street, Boston Street, Franklin Street, and this is Western Avenue out here. In 1973, they tore down the Johnson building. In 1974, they built the new boiler plant. This is the construction of it going up. And it was completed in August of 74. This is the finished boiler plant. And 10 years later, 1980 is another aerial view of the hospital. I don't know if you can make those numbers out or not, but this is the parking garage is number 1. Number 2 is the Morgan building. Number 3 was the Spinney. 4 was the Chase. 5 was the administration building. 6 was the Redford. The Purveyor was 7. Ward F, 8. 9 was the service building. 10 down here is the Ireson Nursing Home. And there is 11 is the new boiler plant they just built. Again, that was in 1980, I'm sorry. In December of 81, somewhere in the vicinity in here, they built a new radiation therapy unit. And this is the foundation of it. They're starting to build it here. And in July of 82, it was just about completed inside. Outside the hospital, they had a heliport where the helicopters used to land. This is Washington Street out here. I believe most of the helicopters would take patients from here into Boston. That was the normal. And this is a view of the hospital just before they went out of business, before they shut down. They closed in January 96, so this was sometime in late 95. Ireson Nursing Home. This is the new boiler plant. This is the service building. A new addition was the ambulance garage, the Lifeline ambulance garage out in front. This is where the helicopter used to land. The Morgan building. This is Washington Street, Boston Street, Franklin Street. And that's what it looked like just before the hospital closed. Now the reason it closed, I told you earlier, you'll probably all know anyway, but I'll refresh your memory. The Union Hospital and the Lynn Hospital merged to form the Atlantic Care. The powers to be determined that they could only run one hospital efficiently, and they opted to have it the Union Hospital. So this place was closed and it was sold. That's a little bit, very brief history of what happened. And then it happened. The hospital was torn down. This is the Morgan building here being torn down. One of the newest part of the hospital was torn down, and this is in 1996. But rather than dwell on the negative, we should dwell on the positive. There's a lot of pleasant memories of the hospital for us who were patients and some of you who were staff there. Those of you who were born at the hospital probably went to the reunion and you were handed a pin saying you were a Lynn Hospital baby and you were pretty proud of it. Or how many times did you go into the lobby to visit a friend and you had to ask the people at the desk where the room was and how to get to it because you had no idea how the hospital was laid out. And how many remember the candy stripers? These are young girls, usually high school girls, who come in and help the nurses with some of the nursing chores. And many a nurse got their start as a candy striper. They got a taste of it and loved it, and were devoted to the profession and became nurses later on. And how many of you had a child you had to leave at the hospital? You're heartbroken to leave a child, but you knew it was getting good care because one of the nurses would take care of the child. This kid here looks none the worse for his problems. He's being read a book. Remember the nurses with the capes? Used to bounce around the hospital with their capes on, part of their uniform. They were a very, very proud profession. And how many of you had a loved one who was in very serious condition in the hospital, and you went to the Interfaith Chapel to pray to your God and hope that everything would work out well? They had a chapel there in the hospital. But probably one of the hardest things was when you were in the hospital and it was time to go home. You wanted to go home in the worst way, but you have met so many new people and new friends, you really had mixed emotions. It was tough saying goodbye. But you had to go home and you're leaving behind some great friends and you got some great care while you're there and you're very, very thankful. The last photo I have is the administration building again out in front of Hospital Avenue. This was taken from a calendar that came out in the hospital, it was either 92 or 93. And the hospital entitled this picture, Lynn Hospital at the End of Its Day, meaning it was nighttime. If you look at this picture and call this Lynn Hospital at the end of its days, meaning the end of its life, we'll all have a lot of pleasant memories about the Lynn Hospital. I hope you all do, and I hope you enjoyed the program tonight. And thank you very much. Even though there is no longer a Lynn Hospital, we are fortunate to have photos and memorabilia in our collection at the Lynn Museum. Come see us at the Lynn Museum at 125 Green Street.